Have you ever loved someone so much that you believed every promise they made, even when everyone else could see the lies? That's exactly what happened to me, and I'm going to share my story with you today because maybe it will help someone else avoid the pain I went through. If you're over 60 like me, please subscribe to this channel and hit that like button, because these stories need to be heard and shared. My name is Martha, I'm 65 years old, and I live in a small town called Riverside in Ohio. For the past 3 years, since my husband Robert passed away from a heart attack, I've been living completely alone in our little house on Maple Street. The silence in that house was becoming unbearable. Every morning I would wake up and make coffee for one person instead of two, and every evening I would sit in front of the television eating dinner by myself, looking at the empty chair where Robert used to sit. My only son David is 25 years old and lives about 4 hours away in Columbus with his wife Jessica. They got married 2 years ago, and since then, our relationship became more and more distant. Before Jessica came into the picture, David would call me every week, sometimes even twice a week. He would tell me about his job at the insurance company, his plans for the weekend, and he would always ask how I was doing after his father's death. But after the wedding, the phone calls became monthly, then every few months, and eventually they almost stopped completely. I tried to understand. I told myself that young married couples need their space, that they're building their own life together, and that I shouldn't be selfish. But the loneliness was eating me alive. I would go to the grocery store just to have someone to talk to. I would spend extra time at the pharmacy chatting with the pharmacist about my blood pressure medication just to hear another human voice. The neighbors were polite but busy with their own lives, and most of my old friends had either moved away to live with their children or had passed away. Then, on a cold Tuesday morning in March, something wonderful happened. The phone rang, and it was David. I was so surprised and happy to hear his voice that I almost started crying right there in the kitchen. He sounded different though, more cheerful than he had been in months, and he had exciting news for me. "Mom," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Jessica and I have been talking, and we think it's time for you to come visit us for a while. Maybe a week or two, or even longer if you want. We have that spare bedroom, and we think it would be good for all of us to spend more time together." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After so many months of feeling forgotten and abandoned, my son was finally inviting me into his life again. I felt like my heart was going to burst with joy. I started asking questions immediately. When should I come? What should I bring? Would Jessica really be okay with having me there for that long? David laughed and said, "Mom, don't worry about anything. Jessica was actually the one who suggested it. She said she feels bad that you're all alone in that house, and she wants to get to know you better. We both want you here. Can you take the Greyhound bus this Friday? I'll pick you up at the station." I was so emotional I could barely speak. Here was my daughter-in-law, who I barely knew and who had seemed cold during our few brief meetings, actually caring about my well-being and wanting me to visit. And my son, my precious boy, was finally reaching out to his mother again. I felt like all my prayers had been answered. "Of course I'll come," I told him, my voice shaking with emotion. "I'll start packing right away. David, you have no idea how happy this makes me. I've missed you so much." "I've missed you too, Mom," he said, and for a moment he sounded like the little boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knee or had a bad dream. "This is going to be great. We're going to have such a good time together." That week was the happiest I had felt since Robert died. I went through my closet and picked out my best clothes. I bought new shampoo and even treated myself to a haircut at the beauty salon. Mrs. Peterson, who has been cutting my hair for 15 years, said I looked more alive than I had in months. I told everyone I met about my trip to visit my son and daughter-in-law, and how we were going to spend quality time together. I packed my small suitcase with such care, folding each piece of clothing perfectly and including little gifts I had been saving for David and Jessica. I brought homemade cookies, some of Robert's old photos that I thought David might want, and a beautiful scarf I had crocheted for Jessica during the long winter evenings when I had nothing else to do with my hands. Friday morning came, and I was at the Riverside bus station 30 minutes early, sitting on the bench with my suitcase beside me and my purse clutched tightly in my hands. I was wearing my best blue dress and the pearl necklace Robert had given me for our 25th wedding anniversary. I felt nervous but excited, like I was going on the most important trip of my life. The 4-hour bus ride to Columbus felt like it took forever. I stared out the window watching the Ohio countryside go by, and I kept imagining what it would be like to be part of a family again. I pictured cooking dinner with Jessica, watching television with David in the evenings, maybe even helping them decorate their apartment or going shopping together. I imagined Jessica asking me for advice about marriage or homemaking, and David telling me about his hopes and dreams for the future. When the bus finally pulled into the Columbus station, I saw David waiting for me near the entrance, and my heart filled with such love and gratitude. He looked handsome in his dark jacket, and he waved when he saw me getting off the bus. I practically ran to him, despite my arthritis, and he gave me a hug that felt warm and genuine. "How was the trip, Mom?" he asked, taking my suitcase from my hand. "It was perfect," I told him, linking my arm through his as we walked toward his car. "I'm just so happy to be here with you." During the drive to his apartment, David told me about his neighborhood and pointed out places where he and Jessica liked to go for dinner or shopping. Everything seemed wonderful and normal, exactly like I had hoped it would be. He seemed relaxed and talkative, asking me about things back home and telling me about his job. But when we pulled into the parking lot of his apartment complex, I noticed that David suddenly became quieter. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, and he cleared his throat a few times like he was nervous about something. "Mom," he said as we sat in the car for a moment before getting out, "I just want you to know that Jessica has been working really hard lately, and she's been pretty stressed. So if she seems a little tired or quiet at first, don't take it personally, okay? She's just been going through a lot." I nodded and smiled, touching his hand gently. "Of course, sweetheart. I understand completely. I'm just grateful that she's willing to have me here." We got out of the car and walked up to the second floor of the apartment building. David unlocked the door and called out, "Jessica, we're here." The moment I stepped inside that apartment, I felt something was wrong. Jessica appeared from the kitchen, and the look on her face was nothing like what I had expected. She wasn't smiling. She barely looked at me. Her arms were crossed over her chest, and her whole body language seemed angry and unwelcoming. "Hi, Martha," she said in a voice that was polite but cold. "I hope you had a good trip." "Thank you, dear," I replied, trying to sound cheerful despite the uncomfortable feeling in my stomach. "It's so wonderful to finally spend some real time with both of you." Jessica nodded curtly and then turned to David. "I need to talk to you in the bedroom for a minute," she said, and they disappeared down the hallway, leaving me standing alone in their living room with my suitcase. I could hear them talking in low, urgent voices, but I couldn't make out the words. The conversation seemed tense, and it went on for several minutes. I stood there feeling more and more uncomfortable, wondering what I had done wrong or what was happening. This wasn't the warm welcome I had imagined during that long bus ride. This wasn't the happy family reunion I had been dreaming about for months. Something was very, very wrong, and I was about to discover just how wrong things really were. When David and Jessica finally came back from their bedroom, I could see that something had definitely changed. David's face looked strained, and he wouldn't meet my eyes directly. Jessica, on the other hand, seemed to have made some kind of decision because she was looking at me with expression I couldn't quite read, but it definitely wasn't friendly. "Mom," David said, clearing his throat, "Jessica has shown me where you'll be sleeping. Let me take your suitcase to the spare room." I followed them down a narrow hallway to a small room at the back of the apartment. It was clearly being used for storage, with boxes stacked in the corners and Jessica's exercise equipment taking up most of the floor space. There was a narrow single bed pushed against one wall, and it looked like they had just thrown some sheets on it right before I arrived. "I hope this will be comfortable enough," Jessica said, but her tone suggested she really didn't care whether I was comfortable or not. "We don't usually have overnight guests, so we're not really set up for it." I tried to stay positive. "This is perfect, dear. Thank you so much for making room for me. I really appreciate you both opening your home." Jessica just shrugged and walked away. David lingered for a moment, looking embarrassed. "Mom, why don't you get settled in, and then we can have some lunch together?" Over the next few hours, I tried my best to be the perfect houseguest. I offered to help with lunch, but Jessica told me she already had everything handled. I tried to make conversation about their jobs, their neighborhood, their plans for the weekend, but Jessica's responses were short and dismissive. David seemed caught in the middle, trying to keep the peace but clearly uncomfortable with the tension in the air. That first evening, I offered to cook dinner for everyone. I had brought some of my mother's old recipes, and I thought it might be a nice way to contribute and show my appreciation. But when I started looking through their kitchen cabinets to see what ingredients they had, Jessica appeared behind me with her arms crossed. "What are you doing?" she asked in a sharp tone. "I was just going to make us a nice dinner," I explained. "Maybe my famous pot roast, or those chicken and dumplings that David used to love when he was little." "We already have dinner plans," Jessica said coldly. "We're ordering pizza. And in the future, please ask before you go through our things." I felt like I had been slapped. I wasn't going through their things. I was just trying to be helpful. But I apologized immediately. "I'm so sorry, Jessica. I didn't mean to overstep. I just wanted to do something nice for you both." David appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Everything okay in here?" "Your mother was going through our cabinets without permission," Jessica said, and the way she said, "your mother," made it sound like I was some kind of unwelcome stranger. David looked at me with disappointment. "Mom, you should have asked first." I couldn't believe that my own son was taking her side when I was clearly just trying to help. But I swallowed my hurt feelings and nodded. "You're absolutely right. I should have asked. I'm sorry." The next few days followed the same painful pattern. Every time I tried to be helpful or friendly, Jessica found something wrong with what I was doing. When I offered to do the dishes after breakfast, she told me I was loading the dishwasher incorrectly. When I tried to tidy up the living room, she said I was moving her things around. When I suggested we all go for a walk in their neighborhood, she said she was too busy. But the worst part wasn't Jessica's coldness toward me. The worst part was watching my son change right before my eyes. David, who had once been warm and loving with me, started treating me like I was an inconvenience. When I would try to talk to him about his childhood or share memories of his father, he would cut me off or change the subject. When I asked him about his work or his friends, his answers became shorter and shorter. I began to suspect that Jessica was talking to him about me when I wasn't around, poisoning his mind against his own mother. I could hear them having quiet conversations in their bedroom at night, and while I couldn't make out the words, I could tell from their tones that they were arguing about something, and I had a terrible feeling that something was me. On my 4th day there, I overheard a phone conversation that broke my heart into pieces. I was in the bathroom when I heard Jessica talking loudly on the phone in the living room. She must have thought I couldn't hear her, or maybe she just didn't care anymore. "No, she's still here," Jessica was saying to whoever was on the other end of the call. "I don't know how much longer I can stand this. She's always trying to help with everything, hovering around like she owns the place. And she keeps telling David stories about when he was little, like she's trying to make him feel guilty or something. It's driving me crazy." There was a pause while the other person responded, and then Jessica continued. "David doesn't see it because she's his mother, but she's manipulative. She acts all sweet and innocent, but I can tell she's trying to come between us. She keeps talking about how lonely she is and how much she misses having family around. It's obvious she wants to move in here permanently, and there is no way I'm letting that happen." I sat on the edge of the bathtub, tears streaming down my face, trying to process what I was hearing. This young woman thought I was manipulative and scheming, when all I wanted was to spend time with my son and maybe feel like I belonged somewhere again. I had never once suggested moving in with them permanently. I had only been grateful for the chance to visit. When I came out of the bathroom, Jessica was off the phone, and she looked at me with an expression that made it clear she knew I had heard everything. But instead of looking embarrassed or apologetic, she looked defiant, like she wanted me to know exactly how she felt about me. That evening, things got even worse. David came home from work looking stressed and tired, and instead of the warm greeting I expected, he barely acknowledged me. Jessica immediately cornered him in the kitchen, and I could hear her talking in urgent, whispered tones. I pretended to be watching television, but I was straining to hear what they were saying. After about 10 minutes, David came into the living room and sat down across from me. His face looked serious, and I had a sinking feeling that whatever Jessica had been telling him, it wasn't good news for me. "Mom," he began, and his voice sounded different, colder than it had ever been with me before. "We need to talk about your visit." My heart started pounding. "Is everything all right, sweetheart?" David glanced back toward the kitchen where Jessica was standing in the doorway, watching us. "Well, the thing is, Jessica has been feeling a little overwhelmed with having a houseguest for this long. She's been working really hard at her job, and she needs the apartment to be a peaceful place where she can relax." I felt like the air was being squeezed out of my lungs. "David, I've been trying so hard not to be in the way. I've been keeping to my room most of the time, and I always ask before I do anything." "I know you have, Mom," David said, but his tone was impatient. "But it's not about what you're doing. It's just that Jessica needs her space right now, and having someone else here all the time is stressful for her." I looked at my son, this young man I had raised and loved and sacrificed for, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "David, I'm your mother. This was supposed to be a chance for us to spend time together, to be a family again." David's face hardened. "Mom, Jessica is my family now. She's my wife, and her feelings have to come first. You need to understand that." Those words hit me like a physical blow. Jessica is my family now. Her feelings have to come first. I had been replaced, pushed aside, made irrelevant in my own son's life by a woman who clearly couldn't stand the sight of me. But just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, Jessica stepped into the living room with a smile on her face that made my blood run cold. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had just won a battle. "Martha," she said in a voice that was sweet but somehow threatening at the same time, "I have some news that I think will help everyone understand why this living situation isn't going to work out." She walked over to David and took his hand, looking down at him with what appeared to be love but felt more like possession. "David and I are expecting our first baby." The room went completely silent. David looked up at Jessica with surprise and joy, and I could see that this was the first time he was hearing this news too. Jessica had saved this announcement for maximum impact, and she was clearly enjoying the power it gave her. "A baby," David said, his voice filled with wonder. "Jessica, are you serious? When did you find out?" "I took the test this morning," Jessica said, still looking at me instead of him. "I wanted to be sure before I told anyone. But now that we're going to be parents, David, we need to think about what's best for our growing family. We need our space, our privacy, and our peace and quiet." I understood exactly what she was doing. This pregnancy announcement wasn't just good news. It was a weapon. She was using this baby, my future grandchild, to push me out of their lives completely. And from the look on David's face, her strategy was working perfectly. "Mom," David said, turning to me with excitement in his eyes, "you're going to be a grandmother. Isn't that wonderful?" I wanted to feel joy, I really did. The idea of having a grandchild should have been the most wonderful news in the world. But all I could feel was the crushing realization that this baby was going to be used to keep me away from my son forever. "Yes," I managed to say, forcing a smile. "It's wonderful news. Congratulations to both of you." Jessica's smile widened, and I knew that she could see right through my fake happiness. She had gotten exactly what she wanted, and now she was ready to deliver the final blow that would change everything between me and my son forever. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I was living in a nightmare. The joy I had felt just a week ago when David invited me seemed like it had happened to a different person in a different lifetime. I lay in that narrow bed surrounded by Jessica's storage boxes, staring at the ceiling and wondering how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. I could hear David and Jessica talking in the kitchen, their voices low but intense. I knew they were talking about me, about what to do with the mother who had become an unwelcome burden in their perfect life. I wanted to get up and make myself useful, maybe cook them a nice breakfast to celebrate the pregnancy news. But I was afraid that any move I made would just make things worse. When I finally gathered the courage to go to the kitchen, I found David sitting at the table with his head in his hands, while Jessica stood by the window with her arms crossed. They both looked up when I entered, and the expression on Jessica's face made it clear that whatever decision they had been discussing, it wasn't good news for me. "Good morning," I said quietly, trying to sound cheerful despite the heaviness in my heart. I was wondering if I could make everyone some pancakes to celebrate the wonderful news about the baby. Jessica let out a small laugh that had no warmth in it at all. "Martha, we need to talk to you about something important." I sat down at the table across from David, and I noticed that he still wouldn't look me in the eyes. His hands were fidgeting with his coffee cup, and I could see the stress written all over his face. This was my son, my little boy who used to come running to me whenever he was scared or confused, and now he couldn't even look at his own mother. "David has something he needs to tell you," Jessica said, moving to stand behind his chair with her hands on his shoulders like she was controlling him. David finally looked up at me, and what I saw in his eyes broke my heart. It wasn't anger or hatred. It was weakness. My son had become a weak man who was being controlled by his wife, and he was about to hurt me because he didn't have the strength to stand up to her. "Mom," he began, his voice shaking slightly, "Jessica and I talked all night, and we've decided that with the baby coming, we really need to focus on preparing for our future as a family." I felt my stomach drop, but I tried to stay calm. "Of course, sweetheart. I understand completely. A baby changes everything, and you both need time to get ready. The thing is," David continued, glancing up at Jessica before looking back at me, "we think it would be better if you went back home for now, just until we get settled into this new phase of our lives." Those words hit me like a truck. Just until we get settled. I knew exactly what that meant. It meant forever. It meant that once I left this apartment, I would never be welcome back. It meant that my grandchild would grow up not knowing me, and my son would disappear from my life completely. "David," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "are you telling me that you want me to leave?" Jessica squeezed David's shoulders, and I could see her giving him some kind of signal. "It's not that we want you to leave, Mom," David said, but his words sounded rehearsed, like Jessica had been coaching him on what to say. "It's just that we need some time to adjust to everything that's happening." I looked at Jessica, and she was staring at me with a look of cold satisfaction. She had won, and she wanted me to know it. She had successfully turned my son against me, and now she was going to enjoy watching me get thrown out of their lives. "How long is, for now, ? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. David and Jessica exchanged another look, and then David shrugged helplessly. "We don't really know, Mom. It depends on how things go with the pregnancy and everything." I felt tears starting to burn behind my eyes, but I was determined not to let Jessica see me cry. "I see. And when exactly do you want me to leave?" "Well," Jessica said, speaking for the first time since this conversation began, "we were thinking maybe today would be good. There's a bus back to Riverside that leaves at 2 o'clock this afternoon." Today. They wanted me gone today. I had been planning to stay for another week at least, maybe longer if things went well. But Jessica couldn't wait another day to get rid of me. She wanted me out of her sight immediately. "Today," I repeated, more to myself than to them. "You want me to pack up and leave today?" "Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be," David said, and for a moment he sounded like he might actually feel bad about what he was doing to me. "This isn't easy for any of us." I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake him and ask him how he could treat his own mother this way. I wanted to tell him that Jessica was manipulating him, that she was using the pregnancy to control him, that he was making the biggest mistake of his life by choosing her over his family. But instead, I just nodded. "All right. If that's what you both want, then I'll pack my things." The look of relief on Jessica's face was so obvious that even David noticed it. For just a moment, he seemed to realize what was really happening here, and I saw a flicker of doubt cross his face. But Jessica was ready for that too. "David, honey," she said in a sweet voice, "why don't you take your mother out for a nice lunch before her bus leaves? Just the two of you, so you can have some quality time together." It was brilliant, I had to admit. Jessica was giving David a way to feel less guilty about throwing me out by offering him one last chance to spend time with me. And she was getting rid of both of us for a few hours so she could have the apartment to herself. David brightened up immediately. "That's a great idea, Mom. Would you like to go have lunch somewhere? Maybe that little diner you used to take me to when I was a kid, if there's one around here." I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell him that I didn't want his pity lunch, that what I wanted was to be treated like his mother instead of like a stranger he was trying to get rid of. But I was desperate for any chance to be alone with my son, to try to make him understand what he was doing. "That sounds nice, David," I said quietly. "Let me just pack my suitcase first." Going back to that small storage room and putting my clothes back into my suitcase was one of the most heartbreaking things I had ever done. Just a week ago, I had packed these same clothes with such hope and excitement. I had been so careful with everything, so proud of how nice I looked, so grateful for the chance to be part of my son's life again. Now I was folding the same clothes with tears streaming down my face, knowing that this was probably the last time I would ever be in my son's home. I looked around that little room with its boxes and exercise equipment, and I realized that this was never supposed to be my room at all. Jessica had never intended for me to be comfortable here. This whole visit had been some kind of test or game, and I had failed it before I even arrived. When I finished packing, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to compose myself. I didn't want David to see how much this was hurting me. I wanted to be strong and dignified, the way Robert would have wanted me to be. But inside, I felt like I was dying. David knocked on the door. "Mom, are you ready to go?" "Just a minute, sweetheart," I called out, wiping my eyes and checking my appearance in the small mirror on the wall. I looked older than I had a week ago. The stress and heartbreak had aged me, and I could see it in my face. When I came out with my suitcase, Jessica was waiting by the front door like she couldn't wait to get me out of there. "Have a nice lunch," she said with that same fake smile. "David, make sure you get her to the bus station in plenty of time. You know how crowded those afternoon buses can get." David carried my suitcase down to the car, and for a few minutes it felt almost normal, like we were just going on a regular outing together. He asked me about what kind of food I was in the mood for, and he told me about a little restaurant nearby that he thought I would like. But during lunch, I could see that his heart wasn't really in it. He kept checking his phone and looking at his watch, and I realized that he was thinking about Jessica back at the apartment, probably counting down the minutes until I would be gone and their life could go back to normal. I tried to talk to him about the baby, about how excited I was to be a grandmother, about how I hoped I could be part of the child's life. But every time I brought it up, David would change the subject or give me vague answers about how they would see how things go. Finally, as we were finishing our meal, I decided to be completely honest with him. "David, I need you to know that I never intended to overstay my welcome or cause any problems between you and Jessica." David looked uncomfortable. "Mom, I know that. You didn't do anything wrong. Then why do I feel like I'm being punished?" I asked, my voice breaking despite my efforts to stay strong. "Why do I feel like your wife hates me, and why are you letting her push me out of your life?" For a moment, just a moment, I saw my real son again. The one who used to love me unconditionally, who used to call me his best friend, who used to tell me he hoped he would marry someone just like me someday. His eyes filled with tears, and I thought maybe I was getting through to him. "Mom," he said quietly, "I love you. You know that, right? This isn't about love." "Then what is it about, David? Because I don't understand any of this." He was quiet for a long time, staring down at his plate. When he finally looked up at me, I could see that he was struggling with something, like he wanted to tell me the truth but didn't know how. "Jessica is pregnant, Mom. And she's scared. She's scared about becoming a mother, and she's scared about whether we're ready for all the responsibility. Having extra people around right now, even people we love, is just too much stress for her." I wanted to point out that I wasn't extra people. I was his mother. I wanted to ask him why his wife's feelings were more important than mine, why she got to decide whether I was allowed to be part of their lives or not. But I could see that he was already feeling guilty enough, and I didn't want our last conversation to be an argument. I understand, I said instead. I just hope that after the baby comes, there might be room in your lives for me again. David reached across the table and took my hand. Of course there will be, Mom. This is just temporary. But even as he said it, I could tell that he didn't really believe it. And neither did I. As we drove to the bus station, I knew with a terrible certainty that this was the beginning of the end of my relationship with my son. At the Greyhound station, David bought my ticket and walked me to the platform where the bus was loading. He gave me a hug that felt desperate and sad, like he knew this was a mistake but didn't have the strength to do anything about it. I'll call you soon, Mom, he promised. And I'll send you pictures of the ultrasound when we get them. I'd like that very much, I said, even though something deep in my heart told me that those pictures would never come. I got on the bus and found a seat by the window. David stood on the platform waving at me, and I waved back until the bus pulled away and I couldn't see him anymore. As we drove through the streets of Columbus, I pressed my face to the glass and watched my son's city disappear behind me. That 4-hour ride back to Riverside was the longest 4 hours of my life. I sat in that bus seat with my suitcase in my lap and my heart broken into a million pieces, knowing that I had just lost the most important person in my world. And the worst part was that he had let it happen. My own son, the boy I had raised and loved and sacrificed everything for, had chosen a woman who couldn't stand me over his own mother. If you're watching this video and you've ever felt rejected by your own children, please hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about love, family, and my own worth as a human being. When I arrived back in Riverside that evening, the house on Maple Street felt different than when I had left it just a week ago. It wasn't just the silence or the emptiness that I had grown accustomed to over the past 3 years since Robert died. It was something deeper, something that had changed inside me during those terrible days in Columbus. I set my suitcase down in the living room and looked around at the home Robert and I had built together, where we had raised David, where we had been happy for so many years. The walls were covered with photographs of our family, pictures of David as a baby, as a little boy, graduating from high school, getting his first job. In every single photograph, he was smiling, and in most of them, I was right there beside him, proud and loving. But now those pictures felt like they were mocking me. They were evidence of a love that I thought would last forever, proof of a bond between mother and son that I had believed was unbreakable. Looking at them now, after what had just happened, I felt like I was looking at the life of a stranger. I didn't unpack that night. I just sat in Robert's old chair and stared at the telephone, waiting for it to ring. I kept telling myself that David would call to make sure I had made it home safely, that he would want to apologize for how things had ended, that he would realize he had made a terrible mistake and ask me to come back. But the phone never rang. The next morning, I woke up on the couch where I had fallen asleep, still wearing the same clothes from the day before. My neck was stiff, my back ached, and my heart felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I made coffee for one person, sat at the kitchen table where I had eaten breakfast alone for 3 years, and finally allowed myself to face the truth about what had happened. My son had abandoned me. Not just physically, by putting me on that bus and sending me away, but emotionally. He had chosen his wife's comfort over his mother's heart. He had let a woman who barely knew me decide that I was not worthy of being part of their family. And he had done it all while pretending it was temporary, while making promises he had no intention of keeping. For the next 2 weeks, I barely left the house. I couldn't face going to the grocery store where everyone knew me, where people would ask about my visit with David and expect me to have wonderful stories to share. I couldn't handle the thought of having to lie and pretend that everything was fine when my world had completely fallen apart. Mrs. Patterson from next door came by several times to check on me. She had noticed that I wasn't getting my mail or keeping up with my garden, and she was worried. I appreciated her concern, but I just told her I was feeling under the weather and needed some rest. On the 16th day after I came home, something happened that changed everything. The phone finally rang, And when I saw David's name on the caller ID, my heart nearly stopped. I had been waiting for this call for so long that I couldn't believe it was actually happening. "Hello, David," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hi, Mom," he said, and immediately I could tell that something was wrong. His voice sounded hollow and defeated, nothing like the confident young man who had put me on that bus 2 weeks ago. "How are you, sweetheart?" I asked, even though part of me wanted to hang up on him and make him feel the same pain he had caused me. "Mom, I need to tell you something," David said, and I could hear that he was crying. "Jessica left me." I felt like all the air had been sucked out of my lungs. "She left you? What do you mean?" "She's gone, Mom. She took all her stuff and moved in with her sister in Chicago. She said she can't handle being married to someone who doesn't know how to put his wife first." I sat down hard in the nearest chair, trying to process what I was hearing. "David, what happened? What about the baby?" There was a long pause, and when David spoke again, his voice was so quiet I could barely hear him. "There never was a baby, Mom. She lied about being pregnant. She made the whole thing up." The shock of this revelation hit me like a physical blow. Jessica had lied about being pregnant. She had used the idea of my grandchild, something that should have been the most joyful news in the world, as a weapon to destroy my relationship with my son. And it had worked perfectly. "She wasn't pregnant," I repeated, still trying to understand. "No, Mom. She admitted it right before she left. She said she had to do something drastic to make me understand that she needed to be the most important person in my life, and that having my mother around all the time was making her feel like she didn't matter." I could hear David sobbing on the other end of the phone, and despite everything he had put me through, my heart ached for him. He had been manipulated and used, just like I had been. The difference was that he had chosen to participate in my destruction, while I had been an innocent victim. "David," I said gently, "I'm so sorry this happened to you." "Mom, I was such an idiot," he cried. "I let her convince me that you were trying to come between us, that you were being manipulative and possessive. I believed her when she said that you wanted to move in with us permanently and take over our lives. I was so worried about being a good husband that I forgot how to be a good son." Hearing him admit this should have made me feel better, but instead it just made me feel sadder. Because now I knew for certain that David had chosen to believe the worst about me. He had been willing to think that his own mother, who had never been anything but loving and supportive, was suddenly a scheming, manipulative woman who wanted to ruin his marriage. "She's been planning this for months, Mom," David continued. "Even before she invited you to visit, she was already talking about how she didn't want you in our lives. The whole visit was a setup to make you look bad and make me choose between you and her." "And you chose her," I said quietly. "I chose her," David admitted, his voice full of shame. "And now I've lost everything. I've lost my wife, I've lost my chance to be a father, and I've lost my mother's trust and respect." David was wrong about one thing. He hadn't lost his chance to be a father. He had lost his chance to be a father with Jessica, a woman who had proven herself to be dishonest and manipulative. But he could still be a father someday with someone who truly loved him and would never ask him to choose between her and his family. But he was right about losing my trust and respect. The man I had raised, the son I had been so proud of, would never have treated his mother the way David had treated me. Somewhere along the way, my sweet, loving boy had become a weak man who could be manipulated by a woman he had known for 2 years into abandoning the mother who had loved him for 25 years. "David," I said, "what do you want from me now?" "I want you to forgive me, Mom. I want us to go back to the way things were before. I want to come home to Riverside and take care of you the way I should have been doing all along." 3 weeks ago, hearing those words would have been like hearing angels singing. The idea that my son wanted to come home, that he wanted to take care of me, that he realized he had made a mistake would have filled me with more joy than I could contain. But now, after everything I had been through, after all the pain and humiliation and heartbreak, those words just made me feel tired. Because I finally understood something that I should have realized years ago. My son was not the man I thought he was. He was not strong enough or wise enough or loyal enough to deserve the kind of unconditional love I had been giving him. David, I said, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Anything, Mom. If Jessica came back tomorrow and asked you to choose between her and me again, what would you do? There was a long, terrible silence on the other end of the phone. And in that silence, I got my answer. Mom, that's not going to happen, David finally said. Jessica is gone. She made it clear that she never wants to see me again. That's not what I asked you, David. I asked you what you would do if you had to choose again. Another silence. Another heartbreaking, revealing silence. I don't know, Mom, he whispered. I honestly don't know. And that was when I finally understood that I had been loving and defending and making excuses for a man who didn't deserve any of it. My son was telling me that even after everything that had happened, even after Jessica had lied to him and manipulated him and abandoned him, he still wasn't sure he would choose his mother over her if she came back. Thank you for being honest, I said. That tells me everything I need to know. Mom, please don't give up on me, David begged. I know I messed up, but I can change. I can be better. David, I spent 25 years believing that you were better. I spent 25 years thinking that I had raised a son who would never abandon his mother for a woman who hated her. I was wrong about you then, and I'm not going to make the same mistake again. What are you saying, Mom? I took a deep breath and felt something shift inside my chest, like a weight I had been carrying for years was finally being lifted. I'm saying that I'm done, David. I'm done being the mother who loves you more than you love me. I'm done being the parent who makes all the effort while you make all the excuses. I'm done waiting for phone calls that never come and visits that never happen. But Mom, I love you, David said, and he sounded like a little boy again, confused and hurt. I know you love me, David. But you don't love me enough. And I finally love myself enough to stop accepting scraps of affection from my own child. 3 months later, David came to Riverside unannounced. I was working in my garden when I saw his car pull into my driveway. My heart skipped a beat, just like it always did when I saw him, but this time I didn't drop everything and run to greet him. I kept weeding my tomato plants and waited for him to come to me. He looked terrible. He had lost weight, his clothes were wrinkled, and he had dark circles under his eyes. But what struck me most was how old he looked. The carefree young man I had sent off to Columbus was gone, replaced by someone who looked like he had learned some hard lessons about life. Hi, Mom, he said quietly. Hello, David, I replied, not looking up from my garden. Your garden looks beautiful. Dad always said you had the best tomatoes in Ohio. Your father said a lot of nice things about me, I said. He was a good man who knew how to appreciate the people who loved him. David flinched at the implication, but he didn't argue with it. Mom, can we talk? I stood up, brushed the dirt off my hands, and really looked at my son for the first time in months. What would you like to talk about, David? I want to apologize. I want to explain. I want to try to fix this. I nodded toward the porch. We can sit on the swing if you want. We sat side by side on the porch swing that Robert had built for me 20 years ago, looking out at the street where David had learned to ride his bicycle, where he had played with the neighborhood kids, where he had grown up into the man who had broken my heart. Mom, I've been thinking about what you said on the phone, about how I don't love you enough, David began. And you were right. I've been thinking about Dad, about how he treated you, about how he never would have done what I did. Your father was far from perfect, David. But he understood loyalty. He understood that when you make a commitment to someone, you honor it. He committed to me on our wedding day, and he honored that commitment every day for 37 years. I made a commitment to you too, Mom. When I was born, when you became my mother, that was supposed to be permanent. Yes, it was. I agreed. But you decided that commitment was negotiable. David was quiet for a long time, and I could see that he was struggling with something. Mom, Jessica called me last week. I felt my stomach tighten, but I kept my voice steady. Did she? She wants to get back together. She says she made a mistake, that she misses me, that she's sorry for everything that happened. And what did you tell her? David looked at me with eyes that were full of pain and confusion. I told her I needed time to think about it. There it was. After everything that had happened, after all the pain and humiliation and betrayal, my son was still considering going back to the woman who had destroyed our relationship. He was still choosing her over me. But this time, instead of feeling heartbroken, I felt something I had never felt before in my relationship with my son. I felt free. David, I said, standing up from the swing, I want you to go back to her. He looked shocked. What? I want you to go back to Jessica. I want you to marry her again if that's what she wants. I want you to have the life you think you want with the woman you think you love. Mom, I don't understand. I thought you hated her. I do hate her, David. But more than that, I pity her. Because she's going to spend her life married to a man who doesn't know how to be loyal, who can be manipulated into abandoning the people who love him most. And I pity you, because you're going to spend your life with a woman who has already shown you exactly how little she respects you. I walked to the edge of the porch and turned back to look at my son, this young man I had loved so completely for so many years. But mostly, David, I pity both of you because you deserve each other. You're both selfish, disloyal people who think love is something you can turn on and off whenever it's convenient. David stood up, his face pale with shock. Mom, you don't mean that. I mean every word of it. Go back to Jessica, David. Marry her, have children with her, build the life you want with her. But don't ever come back here expecting me to be waiting for you when it falls apart again. You're my mother, David said, and his voice was breaking. You can't just stop loving me. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and I realized that somewhere along the way I had stopped seeing him clearly. I had been so busy loving the idea of him, the memory of the sweet little boy he used to be, that I had ignored the reality of the weak, selfish man he had become. David, I will always love the little boy you used to be. I will always cherish the memories of the son who used to run to me when he was scared, who used to tell me I was the best mother in the world, who used to promise he would take care of me when I got old. But that little boy is gone, and I'm tired of pretending that the man standing in front of me is the same person. I walked to the front door and put my hand on the doorknob. I've learned something important these past few months, David. I've learned that I deserve better than scraps of love from people who are supposed to cherish me. I've learned that being alone is better than being with someone who makes you feel worthless. Mom, please don't do this, David begged, and he was crying now, but his tears didn't move me the way they once would have. Goodbye, David, I said. I hope you find the happiness you're looking for. I really do. But you're not going to find it here, because I'm no longer willing to be hurt by someone I love. I went inside and closed the door behind me. Through the window, I watched David stand on my porch for almost an hour, crying and occasionally calling my name. But I didn't go back outside. For the first time in my life, I was putting my own emotional well-being ahead of my child's wants and needs. After he finally left, I sat in my living room and looked around at all those photographs on the walls. The next day, I took them all down. Not because I wanted to erase David from my life completely, but because I wanted to remember him as he really was, not as I had wanted him to be. That was 6 months ago. David did go back to Jessica, just as I knew he would. They got married again in a small ceremony that I wasn't invited to, and according to Mrs. Patterson, who heard it from someone at the post office, they're expecting a baby. A real baby this time. I hope that child brings them joy. I hope David learns to be a better father than he was a son. And I hope that someday, when that little boy or girl grows up and disappoints David the way he disappointed me, he will remember this conversation and understand what he put me through. As for me, I'm doing better than I have in years. I've joined a book club at the library, I've started volunteering at the animal shelter, and I've made some new friends who treat me with the respect and kindness I deserve. I'm no longer waiting for phone calls that never come or visits that never happen. I learned that being alone doesn't have to mean being lonely, And that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their selfishness by always being there to clean up their messes. If you've made it through this entire story, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel and hit that like button, because there are so many of us out there who have been hurt by the people we love most. And if this story has touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, you are worthy of love that doesn't come with conditions. You are worthy of relationships that don't require you to sacrifice your dignity. And you are never too old to start demanding better for yourself. Sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. But we always have the choice to stop accepting that pain and start choosing ourselves instead. That's the hardest lesson I ever had to learn, but it was also the most important one.